Okay, hello everyone. I will be waiting a couple more minutes for people to be able to join, so bear with me a little while. So waiting for a couple people to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think I will get started. So welcome everyone to this webinar about how to embed AI into your ESG reporting strategy. My name is Carla. I'm a growth marketing manager here at Brink, and I'm really happy to welcome you to this hopefully very informative session about how you can actually use these new tools, LLM powered tools, to kind of supercharge your ESG reporting strategy. Before kind of diving into some more housekeeping rules, I actually wanted to introduce to you our speaker host for this webinar, that is Sam, Brink's CTO and co-founder. So Sam, if you want to say a few words about yourself, that would be really great.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Carla. And yeah, welcome everyone. Great to see so many people joining for a topic so close to my heart. So yeah, my name's Sam. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Brink. My background's really in machine learning and AI, but I've been very interested about the question of where AI can apply to help accelerate the sustainability transition in general, and in particular, how we can use it to help get capital to sustainability projects faster. So really excited to talk about some practical use cases of AI and in particular, large language models to sustainable finance today.
Cool, thanks a lot, Sam. And now, before actually diving into these very interesting topics, I just wanted to remind you of the sort of housekeeping rules for this webinar. So just for you to know, the webinar will actually be recorded. The recording is already in progress. However, I want to remind you that the recording will not be shared publicly after the webinar, but we will be sending it to you. So yeah, I mean, for you, it's all good because you registered, but also feel free to share it with your associates through this link that I will be sharing with you after the webinar. And then for your questions, we will have actually a Q&A session at the end after Sam's presentation. You are already free to leave your questions in the Q&A function. We disable the chat function, but you can use the Q&A function to leave whatever questions you might have. And I know sometimes during a webinar, you actually, you might think of some questions, but maybe they don't come to mind immediately to you. This actually often happens to me, like I'm in a webinar and maybe after the webinar, I'm like, oh, I should have asked that one question. So if it happens to you that you have questions after the webinar, just feel free to reach out. I just left our emails in this slide, so you can use our personal emails to reach out to us or through our website, how you prefer. Yes, and then I also wanted to give you an overview of the webinar's agenda, actually. This is actually the part that will follow these housekeeping rules, so the actual content of the webinar. So I think, Sam, you will first give an intro to Brink, kind of give an overview of who we are, what we do, and sort of a high-level intro to AI, and more specifically LLMs, which are really the topic for this webinar. And then we will dive into how you can actually harness, right, these AI tools, these LLM models to kind of supercharge your ESG team's workflows. And then after that, we actually have prepared a very practical section for this webinar where we will dive into some real use cases for these applications. And especially in particular, we will show sort of like our own newly launched ESG AI tool, which is actually a really exciting moment for us because this has been just released. And then, as I was mentioning before, we will have a Q&A after this content part. Yes, so actually before diving into these topics and handing it over to you, Sam, I sort of wanted to break the ice a little bit, and I wanted to launch a poll, or like 2 polls for you to actually answer to some questions. And so I think I will be launching the polls now, so feel free to start answering. Okay, you should be seeing the poll now. So just for you to know, the questions are: what types of use cases do you think your ESG teams could use to augment its ESG strategy? So which use cases you can think of with LLMs that could actually help your team perform better when it comes to both reporting and other parts of, the whole ESG workflows that you have in your team. And then the other question is actually also very important, because it's about what are the biggest concern or the biggest concern for your organization when it comes to embedding LLM powered tools in your ESG workflows. These are both topics that we will actually dive into just in a few moments. So it's actually really interesting for us to gather sort of your first impressions, and then we will see if it matches what we think could be the most important, relevant informations here. Okay. I will give you a couple, maybe more, or like 1 minute more to fill out this poll. See many questions coming, many answers coming in.
Yeah, and in good poll etiquette, we've also included an other option. So
yeah,
for folks
exactly.
who have no idea what an LLM is, or if this is all news to you, I hope that through the course of this webinar, maybe it gives you more ideas and insights, and also we're really happy to chat afterwards for anyone who wants to follow up on any of that.
Exactly. It's fair to say I don't know sometimes. It's honest and it's transparent. Perfect. I will actually be sharing the results of this. I will just give it a couple more seconds because I still see people answering. I don't want to rush it, but I will actually be sharing the results in the last part of the webinar. So if you are curious of what other people said, we will leave this for the end. Okay, I will end the poll now. Great, I ended the poll. So that's settled. And now actually I want to hand it over to you, Sam, for the actual exciting part of this webinar, which is the content part.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Carla. Yeah, so let's dive straight in. I wanted to actually start with a claim that sustainable finance will become as embedded and ubiquitous as financial accounting within the next 5 years. I think that our view at Brink is that, driven by regulatory pressure and investor pressure, ESG is quickly going to become an essential part of how the economy works over the next 5 years. And I think we already begin to see that with ESG and sustainability specialists being the second fastest job growth area this year, taken only over by AI and ML specialists, which I think is maybe quite fitting for the topic of the talk today. But even though there's so much growth in ESG and sustainable finance, this is also creating a number of really serious problems. Not only in the talent crunch, I think many organizations can't find the ESG specialists they need to be able to actually action their vision, but also specific problems created by ESG knowledge gaps. There's so many new regulations and frameworks coming out to get your head round, as well as the complex nature of ESG data, which often either doesn't exist or exists in complicated and unstructured sources and documents. And we looked at this at Brink, and it was kind of based on those insights that we founded Brink to pioneer the use of AI, and in particular large language models, to help support this new generation of ESG and sustainable finance knowledge workers, and help to accelerate getting capital into the right places so we can transition the economy in time. So that's the 30-second pitch of Brink, but probably many of you are wondering what even is a large language model. So I wanted to take a step back and first talk about what actually are LLMs. I mean, probably many of you in one way or another have heard of them, as they're the underlying technology or foundational model under ChatGPT. But I wanted to talk about them a bit more in the context and history of where they come from, especially the kind of like combination of research areas that have been brought together here. So if we imagine artificial intelligence to be, the general pursuit of creating systems which have human-like intelligence, machine learning is really a field of that has gained a lot of progress in the in the last decade or so, which says, can we instead of trying to write rules for this, actually create data and train models to learn these patterns by the examples of that data. And deep learning is really just a subset of that says, what about if we use very deep architecture models and throw loads and loads of data at it, which, spoiler alert, seems to basically work very well. And finally, another another jargon term, natural language processing, is really the the subfield looking specifically at human language and text data. So if we bring all of that together, I think helps understand what a large language model really is. So if we want to learn from data, and we want to learn from text data, and we want to learn from a lot of text data, then that's really what large language models are. So large is the loads of data part. Language is the NLP part, to do with using text data as the input. And the model part really refers to using that data to train and teach these models. So they're basically very, very big language models that have been trained on large corpuses of text data. So I think the model underlying ChatGPT has some hundreds of gigabytes of training data, essentially the whole internet, and some billions of parameters to the model. So they're very, very big models that means that they can be quite adaptable to lots of different use cases. So that's what LLMs are, but like, why do we care about them? Like, why are they different? And why are they having such a big impact? I think the best way to understand this is to think about LLMs compared to a more traditional kind of narrow AI workflow. So, originally you would have an idea about how AI or machine learning could potentially improve a system or generate, new value. But then you would have to go and actually collect labeled data for that specific use case. So you can imagine, you want to classify tweets as either positive or negative in sentiment, but you now need to go and collect a bunch of tweets and hand label whether they are positive or negative in order to actually train this model to do the task. Typically, depending on the feature, this could be 1 to 3 months of collecting data, training models, getting it deployed, and then finally getting some value out of it and kind of starting this feedback loop where you learn, maybe have another idea of how to improve the model, or are able to collect more data. If we contrast this to this kind of new workflow that's developing using LLMs, essentially what's happened is we've outsourced the really time-consuming and painful part of the AI development process to these giant pre-trained models. So now you can have an idea. Let's say, again, I want to, classify tweets as positive or negative, but using these giant models that have been trained with a massive amount of text on very deep architectures, so they can be adapted to lots of different use cases easily. We can simply write an input prompt, for what we want. So given this tweet, does it look like it's positive or negative in sentiment? And that can take 1 or 2 days, or as little as a few minutes, if you know what you're doing, and get that deployed and start creating value straight away. I think that the really interesting thing here is by reducing that iteration cycle down, and I want to be clear, there's also downsides of LLMs, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And in many cases, you won't get perfect results on the first attempt, but by having such a short iteration cycle compared to kind of narrow or traditional AI development, it means you can, improve your prompts and even potentially fine tune the model for your specific use case over time to improve the performance. but still start getting value from day one and start learning about the problem and building on it. So I think that's why LLMs are having such a big impact across so many different industries, because they've just brought down the time and complexity to building new use cases. So to kind of standardize that into some of the advantages of LLMs, I think one of the main things, as we saw, is having less or no training data to get started results in you being able to create new use cases much faster than you previously could, from months or even years of development down to weeks or days. And I think the other advantage there is it also means you can plausibly develop much more complicated use cases by chaining together these different LLM models to create kind of complicated workflows. You can develop much more complicated use cases than if you had to go and collect training data for each one and build them on top of each other slowly. So that's some of the kind of amazing advantages that apply to LLMs across, different industries. And I think we're seeing tons of use cases kind of ballooning in this kind of Cambrian explosion of LLMs recently. But I also wanted to, talk about some of the practical disadvantages and limitations of LLMs. There's no such thing as a free lunch. So I think some of the main things that you'll hear about and that are, serious drawbacks currently. One is, of course, like what is tend to be called hallucinations, which basically means the models were trained on static data, often, from earlier in the past, from 2021 or before. And it means that the information that they know about can sometimes be outdated, or even they can generate incorrect but plausible sounding facts. So that's definitely one major drawback. The second is privacy concerns. One of the major upsides of outsourcing these large language models to companies like OpenAI that have built absolutely giant kind of monster pre-trained language models is it really reduces the time to implement use cases. But of course, it also means that you have to send your data via API to these companies. And I think, especially in the ESG space where there's very private and complicated data, that there's concerns about data privacy issues there. And third and finally, although the iteration cycle is maybe a lot quicker, LLMs are certainly complicated still, both in terms of the cost of people and technology to develop, also system issues such as latency of actually getting results, and in general implementing LLMs practically into your existing systems and workflows is certainly not totally straightforward. At the end of this webinar, I want to talk a little bit about how we're addressing all three of those actually at Brink. But I think this is a really great, hopefully a good overview of some of the benefits and drawbacks of LLMs in general. Let's now take that learning and apply it to ESG specifically. So how can we embed LLMs into ESG workflows? I wanted to start before we dive into that, just to say that, AI is transforming sustainability and ESG really across the board. And I think that's from applications right on the front lines of, decarbonizing the electricity grid or the transport system, as well as kind of supporting industries like sustainable finance, policy, education. And I'm also a core member of an NGO called Climate Change AI, which helps to catalyze and find use cases for AI that can support the climate transition. So I encourage any of you who are interested in this topic, more generally, to get in touch with us. Really always happy to chat. But today we're going to explore just one of these dots, which is LLM and NLP use cases within sustainable finance. So yeah, if we really deep dive into that, what did we find? I think the first thing here is that the first thing to do here is to map out really what is the workflow of an ESG analyst. And I think that one of the really interesting things that we've learned at Brink is that this new era of ESG analysts and sustainable finance, knowledge workers, they have an emerging similar workflow, even across different industries. Of course, whether you're in an ESG team directly at a corporate compared to an ESG analyst at an asset manager or a fund, there's the devil's in the details, and there's of course major differences, but it's still, in a way, whether you're doing this assessment for your own company or for a number of companies in your portfolio, we find that there's this kind of common workflow of, first of all, needing to measure and report. So screening the market for how regulations are changing, different ESG workflows and ESG credentials of companies that you're looking into. And then, of course, requirement setting, deciding which ESG regulations or frameworks are applicable to you and that you want to develop around. And then, of course, the messy work of really collecting ESG data, and as well as verifying that it's actually quality and it fits within what you're trying to do. And finally, bringing all that together to actually report the ESG credentials, again, for your own company or for your fund and the portfolio companies within that. So that's the kind of first workflow that we're going to dive into in detail today. But of course, it's really a closed loop where you want to then take that data and analyze it to also create, strategies, set targets. How can we actually improve? And of course, implement those improvement plans to do the real work of ESG, let's say, which is figure out how to make your company or your portfolio companies more sustainable over time and monitor that progress. And then, of course, you have this kind of loop of the ESG workflow. So at a very conceptual level, that is one mapping of how ESG as a workflow can be conceptualized. And one of the other really interesting things here that we see is that ESG analysts, again, across different industries, it also means they have recurring and similar pain points. So yeah, again, if we zoom now into the kind of measure report part of this workflow, we see time and time again, folks facing the same issues. So yeah, beginning at the beginning, at that level of market screening, knowing what regulations are even important, as well as, of course, target company screening, can be a really slow and manual process, whether that's, at a corporate trying to understand the ESG credentials of your suppliers or your vendors, or at a fund where you're trying to target, screen target investments. This is currently a pretty manual process and can be a real bottleneck, especially when you're talking about doing it at scale. Moving to the requirements setting, one thing that we come up to over and over again is interpreting these regulations. So whether that's EU taxonomy or SFDR or the whole alphabet soup of other regulations and frameworks, they tend to not be written in a super understandable way, especially in how you actionably interpret them in your context. And that's a pain point that we see coming up over and over again. And I think for funds is even extrapolated even further, because that education piece also now needs to be done to all your portfolio companies who have probably never heard of any of this stuff before in many cases. Of course, data collection, I think that comes up at every conference I've ever been to. ESG data is often missing. It's very hard to collect correctly, and is often a whole new topic for many companies and funds. So it can be difficult to collect in the first place. As well as, of course, actually, you need to make sure that that data is quality. So manually checking over ESG data and document quality is very slow and painful and doesn't scale well. And then, yeah, finally, of course, putting together compliant reports is it can be a massive time sink. Every minute you're writing a report is not a minute that you could actually be thinking about the strategy and improvement of sustainability at your company or at your fund. So these, I think, are not an exhaustive list in any way, but some of the main pain points that we see coming up time and time again for ESG analysts, both in corporates and in the financial services sector directly. So yeah, now the fun bit. How can we imagine LLMs playing a role here? I think one of the things that Brink is really interested in is using LLMs as a co-pilot to help support and augment ESG analysts as they go through this workflow. So yeah, just to take a couple of examples, target screening of your suppliers or of potential investments. You can use LLMs to automate this target screening by looking at public data of those companies and condensing it into predicting ESG credentials of that company. For example, whether it's likely to be EU taxonomy eligible and under what activities. Of course, interpreting regulations can be very complicated. And one thing there is by ingesting the regulatory documents and making them available to LLMs, we can power kind of LLM chat to allow you to ask questions about the regulations in your specific context to understand it better and how to apply it in your case. For collecting ESG data, LLMs can help assist that collection and extraction kind of workflow. So whether that's, taking metrics from energy bills and converting that into the right format to be compliant with specific frameworks, or actually like on the ground helping to formalize how that collection process is going to work. And then, going on to actually verifying the quality of that data. I know that for many people, the upcoming kind of audit requirements around ESG is something that people want to get ahead of. And LLMs can help assist that data and document verification step and actually see whether the evidence provided for a specific ESG, legal clauses contains the content that is that it should, or if there's anything missing. Yeah, and then of course, finally, LLMs can also help generate report templates. And I think one thing that's really exciting there too is also analyze if there's a content missing or weak points of those reports that could be improved before you publish it. So again, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but I think gives some high-level examples of where LLMs could be rapidly applied to your ESG workflows to be a co-pilot for you to help augment that workflow and make it more scalable. Of course, we've talked pretty theoretically so far about these use cases and these pain points. So I wanted to now dive into a bit more detail about some practical examples. I think what we wanted to do there is, to take you through some examples using Brink's first product, which is an AI co-pilot to support ESG teams and analysts at investment managers do EU taxonomy and SFDR reporting. So let's say within the context of EU taxonomy, doing an EU taxonomy alignment assessment, of course, you have the raw regulatory text itself, but Brink platform actually provides also a co-pilot for a number of kind of common tasks there. For example, generating an explanation of those like kind of horrible legal clauses in more understandable layman's terms, as well as kind of more context specific tasks like generating actionable items of how you will actually need to comply with that regulation in a step-by-step way. Of course, you can also ask kind of specific questions to the model. In this case, talking about which exact pesticides can I use to still comply with the, the taxonomy clause here. And by also ingesting the regulatory text with the model, we can generate, the specific examples that are relevant for your question and your use case. One of the things I'm really excited about is also you can upload your own documents here, both to act as an audit trail, so you have clear evidence supporting each of these claims, but also to make that available to the model. So for tasks like extracting the relevant sections that are relevant for that clause. And this, of course, also helps you to verify and do the kind of audit part of this step. So I hope that gives a kind of practical use case of how LLMs or how Brink is applying LLMs to SFDR and EU taxonomy reporting. But of course, that's just a couple of examples of which I think there's many, many use cases that have been unlocked by this kind of new exciting technology. I said at the beginning that there is, of course, some serious drawbacks and limitations to LLMs, and those certainly are true. But I wanted to end here by just talking about some of the ways that we're thinking at Brink of addressing those. And some of the kind of exciting developments that have been going on to that end. The first is hallucinations and incorrect information, especially in the context of ESG and legal topics, is of course a really big issue. The way, as I hope we showed briefly there, is by being able to ingest context-specific data and documents, both updates to the regulations, but also your own private, portfolio companies or your own corporate documents. We can make that information available to the LLM so that up-to-date and more specific information is available and can be used by the model. The second thing that we talked about was data privacy concerns. And I think this is, yeah, again, a really big topic if you're talking about financial and ESG data. One of the things that we in beta testing there with, which is quite exciting, is instead of offering just OpenAI, GPT endpoints, we're also deploying self-hosted open source LLMs, which means that the LLM is actually deployed within our own infrastructure and can ensure that the data never leaves then your own system. Yeah, and I think that's a really exciting development around LLMs and the move towards open sourcing them. And then, yeah, third and finally, it's complex to understand all this stuff. It's complex to implement in your specific ESG workflows. I think, everyone, although that there's some really common patterns that are emerging in this new kind of ESG world, everyone's situation is slightly different. Everyone has slightly different pain points and requirements. And so one of the ways that we want to help there Brink is by holding expert workshops to explore how this base LLM technology could apply to your specific ESG context. So that maybe leads seamlessly on to the final part of this webinar today is, the 2 calls to action. The first is we're offering early access to our ESG Copilot features, which are being shipped and iterated on kind of on a weekly basis at this point. And if you're interested to get early access and be a beta tester for those, there's a sign up on our website, brink.com. And yeah, we'll allow you to play around with some of the newest features and models we're deploying. And secondly, if you are interested in having a workshop to go into more detail about how AI and LLMs can apply in your specific ESG context, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me, reach out to Carla, reach out to anyone on the Brink team. I mean, yeah, we're super excited about how this technology can help accelerate ESG and sustainable finance, and we'd love to partner with you to explore that together. So those are the calls to action. And also if you have questions in regards to any of that, we're going to do Q&A at the last part of this webinar. So fire away if you do. So yeah, with that, I will hand back over to Carla. That's the kind of the content for the day. We'll go into more of a polls and question answer time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sam. That was a very, I would say, thorough and informative presentation. And of course, I would just, kind of stress again what you just said. So if you have any questions or doubts, or I don't know, you're kind of shopping around for different solutions, feel free to reach out. It's really easy, and you can get more information and hopefully more information about we can actually help you with your specific use case if you have one. Great. So as you were saying, it's actually time for us to have a look at what what the polls results are. So give me just a second I hope I will be able to share the results. So yeah, can you see the results, Sam?
I can indeed, yeah.
Nice. So I think it's quite interesting and clear that document analysis seems to be the type of use case that most people think, or more people think, can be augmented with LLMs. I would actually be interested in knowing if this is this has changed in a way after you gave your presentation, because I think you presented many other use cases. But yeah, it's still a quite interesting result. And then also the second, we can see that AI hallucination is the biggest sort of topic of concerns. So having unreliable and biased results, I think, as you rightly mentioned before, of course, when you deal with regulations and that are like sort of regulatory standards or reports that will be audited, it's quite important, I think, for people to be reassured that the AI will not provide incorrect information, which, I mean, it's super normal. So, and I see there are actually a couple questions that have already come in that touch again on this point of AI hallucination. But yeah, Sam, what do you think of these results? Is there something that strikes you as interesting or unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that strikes me as really interesting is that those two top results are connected, right? Like, so I think that one of the major drawbacks or limitations of kind of out of the box LLMs like ChatGPT is, of course, it doesn't have access to your company's data. It doesn't have access to the context around your own documents. And that means that there's really a lot of limitations to what it can know and what it can answer, and results in a lot of this hallucination and unreliable results. And then on the flip side, systems like what we built at Brink to actually allow you to ingest those documents and make those machine readable and available to the model kind of addresses hallucination while also providing much more detailed and context-specific answers. So yeah, it's interesting that the thing people are most interested in also is part of the solution to the thing people are most worried about. Yeah,
indeed, I agree. It's quite interesting, and I mean, all of these topics are very connected to one another, right? By improving models and the accuracy of these models, and the sort of expand the range of use cases they can cover, then as an end outcome of that, you also sort of reduce concerns or problems that these models would actually have. Cool, nice. So I will just stop sharing the results of the poll, and I think it's actually time for us maybe to dive into the Q&A part, so into the Q&A section of this webinar. So I will just start by, I don't know, there have been quite some questions that have come in, but I will just pick the ones that I think be, maybe the most interesting for you to answer right off the bat. And then, of course, if there are other questions or questions that we don't answer to now, I will be happy to pick up contact with you or with those of you who sent questions to answer them maybe separately. But yeah, I mean, Sam, just to get started on that. So I think there is a question that has come in about uncertainty of ESG regulations, right? I mean, we talked about how the regulatory landscape is quite complex and how we need to be sure that the way these models answer to these questions are actually in a way correct and they don't provide false information. But what about the changes in the regulations? Because I think, I mean, I see really almost every other month some new FAQs coming up from the European Commission or other authorities about how we can actually interpret these regulations. There are often new discussions, changes. Would an AI model or our model or an adapted LLM that can handle these use cases be able to stay up to date with these regulatory changes?
Yeah, I mean, that's a super great question. And I think that, the way that we're approaching that, because that would be a major issue with a kind of a static model like GPT, which only has information available from 2021. So it saw, for example, the taxonomy, but not all of the changes that have happened around, Taxo 4 and the updates and clarifications since then. The way that we're approaching this, like I said, is using that same technology we developed for ingesting private documents and making that available to the model. We also actually have our own pipeline for ingesting updates to the regulations. So that's both the actual regulatory text, but also appendices and clarifications on it, so that knowledge for the model on this specific topic is kept up to date. And I think that's like kind of one of the main advantages of building LLM use cases specifically for ESG and that this area that we feel we can really help in. And yeah, I mean, I think that the other cool thing there is if you compare that to the manual version of this, right, where you need to first go and actually be aware of all of those updates and then try and figure out how they work in your context. I think that that's exactly an example of how we imagine LLMs as a co-pilot to ESG workflows can really like bring down the time and complexity for you and let you get on with the high value parts of your job.
Nice. Yeah. And I think it's really great that you mentioned ChatGPT and this sort of, tools that now everybody really uses. And because there is a question about that, there is a question specifically about what are really the key differentiators between sort of a bespoke LLM or AI tool with something as big and popular as ChatGPT? Are there other differences besides, this ability to stay up to date with regulations? Something that you consider very important because like I could just ask my regulatory questions to ChatGPT, why not? Like I could do that in principle. Maybe the outcome would be a bit strange though.
Yeah, another great question. I mean, I think like one of them is of course having both your private information or documents available as well as the regulatory updates available, so that the knowledge available to the model can change and improve over time. As we just talked about, I think it is also important to talk about this thing that we touched on briefly. ESG data is financial data, is private and potentially very sensitive data. And so I think one of the other major things about building a system to support these use cases is also which is not just cool OpenAI and just like get a result, is I think that one thing we're really keen on at Brink is, if not moving away from OpenAI endpoints, is actually offering our users the option. And if they want their data to be shared or to be kept internally, and like I think that's really important as we develop AI use cases, that we always keep that at front of mind. And I think so by developing a system as we have at Brink, and being able to switch between large language models and use open source language models is like in the long term pays a lot of dividends to make sure that data is safe, and also we're not tied into OpenAI.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I also wanted to add to that we're seeing now really a shift also when it comes to regulations in the EU specifically, to kind of make sure that the usage of data by these large American corporations is in a way limited. So it would probably be a good idea to already start thinking of other approaches, other solutions that are not heavily or solely reliant on OpenAI or other huge American organizations.
I see that we got 2 more questions flooding in here. And I wanted to take both of those in turn because I think they're really interesting. The first is from Jon, who, full disclosure, I know, but from Optimus Ventures. But hi, Jon. He says, how big is the challenge of hallucination in the workflow you propose? I think just worth addressing that now because it's related to what we were just talking about. One, of course, it's dependent on the use case. Like if you are verifying data for audit, it probably is much more important that you don't hallucinate than some other use cases which maybe are like, okay, I want a general template for this report, but if some bits of it I need to adjust, I don't really mind. So the answer is it depends, but I would say 2 things that are really important. One is, as we talked about a number of times now, being able to ingest up-to-date and specific documents really helps reduce hallucinations. And we see that across the board. And it's also worth mentioning there that good prompt engineering also helps reduce hallucinations. You can, construct the prompt to say, hey, it's really important to me that you don't make stuff up. So can you take that into consideration when you generate the response? And the other thing that is worth saying, which is more of a meta point, I guess, but hallucinations, I think, become particularly problematic if you want to fully automate a process. And I think that that's where a lot of this is heading, but where we see the technology is at, and how we think we can use it practically at Brink is to augment the ESG workflows now. So, let's say that there was something slightly incorrect in a response, but you can also follow up and ask more questions about it, while working with the model. Or you can say, hey, in this context, it's not actually applicable to me, so I need you to adjust it. So I think that concept of augmentation over automation is also really important for saying, how do you, and this is true of all AI systems, but how do you get value out of them when you can't guarantee you're going to get 100% accuracy all the time, which is just what the real world looks like. And I think augmentation is one of the great ways to achieve that. yeah, I know we're almost at time, gone so fast, but there is one final question that says, so you're advocating verticals, ESG in LLMs that could be shared with different financial institutions, right? And I think, yeah, right. What I think one of the super exciting things that like has really got us excited at Brink is that we see these same pain points cropping up again and again in ESG teams and analysts at corporates, you know, the same sort of similar problems for fund managers and asset managers who are trying to help all their portfolio companies do that. We also, you know, it's the same problems that say like green loans are having, where they need to do this kind of workflow for all of their loan book. So I really believe that although, you know, our first product is focused mostly on asset managers, they have the real pain point right now. And the same workflows and pain points apply to this whole new kind of era of ESG and sustainable finance. And I think Brink is trying to build the infrastructure that underlines all of that to support support workflows across all of those different industries. And that's kind of exciting.
Cool. I would say, yeah, maybe it's time to actually end this webinar. I wanted to thank all of you for the really great questions and nice participation. And I also wanted to remind you that, of course, this will not be our last webinar. We are already planning our next webinars. And I think we are already planning one webinar that will sort of tackle the sort of broader issue of how do you build an LLM that complies with European regulations, which is actually a very exciting topic, I would say. But yeah, thanks to all of you for participating.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Great to see so many people interested in this topic. So yeah, please get in contact if you want to speak more. Thanks so much.
Bye.